Good afternoon. Welcome to the Big Show. The Big Show comes at you every day, right around 5 o'clock. We like to break down whatever happened during the day in the world of sports in Pittsburgh. And of course, that generally means something about the Steelers. We're brought to you, obviously, by FanDuel, as we are every single day. FanDuel Casino for all of your needs when it comes to betting and betting by betting from your phone or betting from your computer, betting actually from anywhere but in a sports book or a casino. FanDuel has all your needs. We'll talk a little bit more about FanDuel in a few minutes. It's interesting. One of the overriding themes of this year has been Mike Tomlin. And of course, that's not much different than pretty much every year with Mike Tomlin. And it's amazing what the debate really is and what it turns into and what it becomes and all that other good stuff. But the reality is, it seems like it's one of those discussions that is not going to go away. I think one of the things that's interesting is that Mike DeCourcy from the Sporting News, who's an excellent columnist, he's a Pittsburgher. He, is a guy that worked here way back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s or whatever, and then got laid off when the press closed or whatever. Ended up with the Sporting News. So he's been a guy who's been an incredible media person and run. He's had an incredible run in the media. He is a big Mike Tomlin advocate, and he wrote a column today that basically said now would be a bad time to fire Mike Tomlin because he is somebody who has kept this team afloat. Despite all of the different quarterbacks and despite all of the different ways that they haven't had a quarterback, a franchise quarterback, he's been able to continue to win games. And that's something that a lot of coaches can't figure out and all of that other good stuff. Obviously, Tuesday at his press conference, somebody asked Mike Tomlin about being on the hot seat, and he made it pretty clear that he's been on the hot seat ever since he got here. And so, I think that this discussion probably doesn't have nearly enough nuance for my taste. I mean, everybody wants me to say, well, I think he should be fired, or I don't think he should be fired, or whatever. But reality is, I still am somebody could be really convinced either way. But I don't think one thing that, he said he has, always been on the hot seat or he's always felt the hot seat. He's had, pressure. The way he looks at it, he's had pressure from day one. Well, there's always pressure, in coaching. Let's face it. But I think one of the things is he's got a lot less pressure on him externally than just about every coach in the NFL. In fact, I would probably still argue that he has the most job security of any coach in the NFL. You saw 6-time Super Bowl champion Bill Belichick, who, by the way, the one year that Brady got hurt, he was 11-5 or something like that. You saw they fired him. They gave him, 1 or 2 years of down. It was down, and it was like, okay, it's run its course. Time to move on. Andy Reid probably isn't going to make the playoffs this year. He'll probably survive that. Maybe he'll retire. But I guarantee you this, if next year he goes and he doesn't make the playoffs or, they lose in the first round, the Chiefs would come to him despite everything that he's done and say, you know what, it's time. Because that's how it is in the NFL. Everywhere but with the Steelers. And that's why one of the things that people talk to me all the time, they say, well, maybe he'll step away. There is really no incentive for him to step away. I mean, let's take a job that's open. I think the Giants are open, right? The Giants need a coach. So let's take that job because, they fired Brian Dable or whatever his name is, and now they, are going to be in the market for a coach. Okay. Let's say he goes to New York. I mean, I guess if you want to consider they have Jackson Dart in place, they do have a quarterback, I guess. But think about it. Think about it. It is going to be really hard for him over the next 4 or 5 years to have the kind of success that's going to make it so that his job is 100% secure in New York. Just not going to happen. Tom Coughlin won 2 Super Bowls. They fired him there. And why? So why, if you're Mike Tomlin and there's not a lot of pressure on you here and your job is never going to be in jeopardy here, why would you go anywhere else? Maybe there's a mutual parting of ways that happens, and, you look at it and you say, okay, well, the mutual parting of ways is such that, Mike Tomlin's just looking for a new beginning. But again, why would he do that? Not saying it won't happen. And believe me, I think this year probably, looking at the way things have played out, is probably the first time I would think, yeah, there's an outside shot that could happen. But I still don't buy it fully. And the reason I don't buy it fully is because I think that when both Mike Tomlin and the Steelers really, sit down in the offseason, they'll both come to the conclusion that the Steelers are happy because they've got a guy who they're always in the playoff race. And he's a guy that keeps them afloat, even through adversity. The team never quits on him. Just when everybody was ready to write them off, I thought the most predictable outcome of Sunday's game was that the Steelers were going to rally the troops and find a way to win, because that's what they do under Mike Tomlin. They win key games when they need to in the regular season in order to keep things going. So to me, I look at this entire picture and I say, it's a two-edged sword. I think it's a good thing that your coach is comfortable, and is a good thing that your coach understands, that he's going to have the organization behind his back. By the same token, if you get too comfortable, is that a good thing? Probably not. And I think that's the discussion that you have to have, is that, the Steelers have really not made any real incentive for him to really do anything differently than he has. I mean, there are people that are basically saying, well, he can't control the quarterback situation. He's been doing the best he can do with what he has, but he's the guy that's picked all these guys. That's the thing. He picked Justin Fields. He picked Kenny Pickett. When they went out and got, Mitch Trubisky, he picked him. So, and when they drafted Mason Rudolph, he picked him. So to me, to blame anybody else but him is a little bit ridiculous, especially if you're in the crowd that says, oh, well, look at, he's never had a losing season, and look at what he's done. And they won a Super Bowl with him. Well, you can't have it both ways. You can't say on one hand, all the good things are his fault, and on the other hand, all the bad things are not his fault. We do that a lot in this country, in a lot of different areas. We do that. If we like somebody or support somebody or want somebody to be great, everything good that happens under their watch, we give them credit for. And everything bad that happens under their watch, we want to blame somebody else. But as I've said, and I'll say it one more time for the cheap seats, multiple times through this 8-year run, the longest run they've had without winning a playoff game, right, since before Chuck Noll, before Chuck Noll, which, by the way, Chuck Noll was hired before I was born, and I'm old. My point is, the longest run they've had without winning a playoff game, it's now 8 seasons. Depending on what happens, it could grow to 9 seasons, depending on the matchup. If they get the right matchup this year, they're probably going to be at home. I think they actually could win a playoff game. But to me, throughout this entire run, they've had multiple coordinators. They've had multiple quarterbacks. They've had multiple general managers. They've changed their front office, a number of different areas, right? They've hired and fired different scouts. They've had a bunch of different assistant coaches come and go. I mean, there's been one constant. Only one. And at some point, doesn't have to be his responsibility that they can't win in the playoffs. And another thing is, at some point, is going 9-8, or this year they'll probably be 10-7. Is going 10-7 or 9-8? Is that going to be, what the standard is, and you're happy with that every year? Because, hey, and I saw somebody say this before. Hey, I wish all you spoiled Steeler fans would try rooting for the Jets or the Browns. If your standard is being better than the Jets and the Browns, then you don't really have a standard. Because it's not very hard to be better than those two organizations, because they're terrible organizations. They're horribly run. And so to me, for instance, say, the Browns wanted to fire Kevin Stefanski. Well, okay, Mike Tomlin, say he went there. I doubt that he would have a run of winning seasons. Why? Because the organization is so dysfunctional and so bad. I mean, one of the things he also knows about having what he has here in Pittsburgh is an organization that's stable, an organization that is actually, for the most part, does things the right way in terms of trying to support their coach. Do I love everything they do? Nope. But the reality is they do it in a way that they're always going to have their head above water. A coach in this organization is set up to succeed. Coach of the Jets, the coach of the Browns, they're set up to fail. It's completely different. And I think that is something that needs to be really, really stated, is that Mike Tomlin has benefited as much from the Steelers as the Steelers have benefited from him. I mean, if Mike Tomlin's first job was the Browns, say Mike Tomlin's first head coaching job, he was the head coach of the Browns, you think we'd be talking about 18 years later, he's still at the Browns? No. Because there's no reason to believe that the organization would have suddenly figured things out. So, he actually, in many ways, right, he is basically one of these guys that got into the right situation early. It's like the discussion we have about Ben Roethlisberger all the time. Say the Browns with that 10th pick, it was 2004, whatever year it was, say they decided that they wanted Ben, which they needed a quarterback, and they should have drafted Ben. Instead, they drafted Kellen Winslow Jr., a tight end. There's the poster child for how bad of an organization the Browns are. They could have had Ben Roethlisberger. Instead, they drafted a tight end when they needed a quarterback. Here's my thing. I don't think we're sitting here talking about Ben Roethlisberger, Hall of Famer, if he would have been drafted by Cleveland. Because he's a great player, but guess what? He went to the right organization that had the right structure in place for him. His first 5 years, he didn't even have to be great because, the defense was so good. They had Jerome Bettis for a couple of years. They were a defensive-minded team. They had superstars on defense, and for his first 4 or 5 years, I mean, he was good, and he whatever. But the reality is, he came to the right situation. Think about the number of quarterbacks that teams like Cincinnati have drafted. I mean, and look, even Joe Burrow. I mean, Joe Burrow has been incredible, and he would be on the route to a Hall of Fame, but he's going to get killed before he, because they have not surrounded him with a good offensive line. And he's out there and he gets, his daylights beat in every single week, and, he's been hurt a lot, and he gets knocked out of games, and he's missed, big portions of seasons because he went to the wrong team. I think that's such an important thing, that you go to a team. And so, my point is, the Steelers organization is set up for guys to succeed. That's the biggest thing. Not fail. Succeed. So, yes, the Steelers have absolutely benefited from Mike Tomlin. There's no question about it. He's been a good coach for them. But by the same token, guess what? He's benefited from the fact that he's had an organization that's run the right way, number one. It's run the right way. It's also not just run the right way. They set their coach up to succeed. They put their coach in a situation where, he's got every opportunity to succeed. And I think that's important, really important. So I am, 100% convinced that, the discussion about Mike Tomlin shouldn't be, should they fire him or not? I mean, I'm on the fence about that. It's about, has he maximized what he can do here? Has he put them in the best position possible? And I think that's the thing you have to ask. He had Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell for 6 years, where they were probably the best quarterback, receiver, running back combination in the NFL. And all he has to show for it is one AFC title game appearance where he got blown out. Other than that, those guys together, and we hear about, the 1 year the guy was, one of them was injured the 1 year, and one of them was injured another. It's not over 6 years. You got to figure it out one time. And one of the reasons they got blown out in that AFC Championship game is because the Patriots were far superior in terms of coaching and coaching strategy. I mean, Tom Brady licked his chops when he saw the Steelers defense every time. If you look at what his numbers were against the Steelers, as great as he is, he would be considered maybe by far, not even a question, by far not just the greatest winner quarterback, but the greatest quarterback. Of his numbers against the Steelers were duplicated with every other team that he played against. So I think you got to, look at that no, he doesn't have a lot of pressure on him. He never has. And he never will. And whether or not that is good or bad, does that keep, his edge? Does that keep him in a place where he is really 100% as sharp as he needs to be? It seems like they go through these lulls in every one of these seasons, right? And then all of a sudden the back's against the wall, and the losing, the never had a losing season record, or whatever it's called, or whatever it is, right? That seems to be in jeopardy. And all of a sudden he rallies the troops. It's just one of those things where, you have to look at, if you're the Rooneys and you haven't put him, if you haven't put him in a place where you are necessarily, he's feeling a little bit of the heat. He's a little bit in a place where he's now all of a sudden, it's not as easy because, they've told him, hey, it's going to be really, really important. You better win this year. You better win this year. And if you don't win this year, guess what? You are going to be in problem. You are going to have a problem. I think that's what it all comes down to, really. It's just really that simple to me. It really is. And I think that's the thing that they've been missing, really, is that edge. If I'm somewhere and I know for a fact that I'm never going to get fired, guess what? I probably am going to act a lot differently than if I have to worry about getting fired. Honestly. It's just how it is. So it's important now to remember that. I mean, he's done a good enough job. And I do agree with parts of what Mike DeCourcy wrote, where he was talking about, the fact that this has been a situation where he's kind of kept them afloat through, all of these different quarterback changes, and the fact that he hasn't found his franchise quarterback. My only problem with that is, it took the Dolphins how many years, and some would argue, even though they got Tua, they probably still haven't found their guy, their franchise quarterback. I mean, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Dolphins haven't won a playoff game since Dan Marino retired. I mean, think about that. It's a long, long time. I was still a young man when Dan Marino was playing, right? You look at it, the Bills, it took them how long to find their franchise quarterback in between Jim Kelly and Josh Allen? And in between was a lot of wasteland. My thing is if your argument for keeping Mike Tomlin around is that you're waiting to see when he gets his next franchise quarterback, that might not ever happen. Period. That might not ever happen. I mean, I just feel like that's the thing. So you're supposed to just say, well, we're going to accept 9-8 because guess what? At 9-8, at least we're in the mix every year. There's some teams that they don't have their quarterback, they lose, a lot. They lose and they get killed, and they have 3 and 14 seasons and all that stuff. It's just one of those things where I think it is important, really important, to try and make sure that you understand. Try and make sure that you understand that Mike Tomlin needs to feel a little bit of heat. He should feel a little bit of heat. If there's not feeling the heat, I just don't think you're going to be as good as you can be. I really believe that. You have to get better. And the only way to get better is by making sure that you go out and take care of business, right? If you're the Steelers organization. And part of that is letting your coach know, listen, we're in the business of winning in the playoffs. We're in the business of winning in the playoffs. Someone said to me, well, listen, I think he has now actually surpassed Jim Mora with the Saints in terms of being, the guy that has lasted longer, despite not winning a playoff game. The only one I think is left in the Super Bowl era is Marvin Lewis. Let me just double check to make sure I have this right. He went, when he was in New Orleans, Jim Mora, he got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7.5 seasons. So Tomlin beat him last year, got to his 8th season. The difference is Jim Mora took over the worst organization in sports, right? And he got him to a level of confidence and a level of respectability that he was going to get more leeway. I mean, he took over maybe the worst organization in sports, and by his second year, he went 12-3. Okay, I'm wrong, actually, because I didn't see these first couple of years. So he actually was there 11.5 years, it looks like. So Mike Tomlin still has a couple of years to go. But again, he was 12-3 his second year, 10-6 his third year, 9-7. The next year they were 8-8, made the playoffs, 11-5, 12-4. Then they went 8-8. I mean, that was so much better than what they were doing. He was going to get a couple of years. But even him, he had 2 7-9s. And I'm pretty sure if we went through, we could find a couple of seasons where Mike Tomlin was 8-8, and it was like basically one game that they won at the buzzer. Otherwise, they'd have been 7-9. I've often argued there's no difference really much, very little difference between 8-8 and 7-9. I think if Jim Mora had gone 8-8 those 2 seasons, he still would have been fired because that's just, the nature of the business. They gave him more leeway because he at least took an organization that was, going 1-14 or whatever, how many games they played before, 3-13 or whatever. And he turned them into a team that was winning games and getting to the playoffs. But you have him and Marvin Lewis. That's it. Marvin Lewis is another guy who got a lot of years because he took over a terrible organization. And the Bengals basically said, hey, listen, here's a guy. At least now we're, going 8-8, 9-7. Heck, we're winning the division every so often. We should be happy. And eventually, even he, it was over for him. But I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't. I don't think there's pressure on Mike. I think Mike could be here as long as he wants to. And I think that's where we're at. But if you look at it, Mike Tomlin is 8-12, I think, as a playoff coach. 8-12. And really, if you think about it, okay, his first 4 years, are completely different than now. His first 4 years, he went out and won. He won his first 6 playoff games. His first 6 playoff games, he was 5-1 in his first 6 playoff games. Since then, he's 3-10. 3-10. 1, 2, 3, 4, and he's lost 6 in a row. He's lost 6 playoff games in a row, and I could go through the years and all the other stuff, and talk about getting blown out. I don't want to do that because it's not really all that interesting to me. I just think that you have to really, really take a look at the entire big picture, and the big picture is that Mike Tomlin is somebody who I think, honestly, Mike Tomlin is somebody who the Steelers never put pressure on. And because they never put pressure on, he has sort of, I don't know about grown comfortable, but it feels certainly like his entire energy is just basically to get to that 9-win mark. And it's just going to be a situation now where that 9-win mark shouldn't be enough. Shouldn't be enough. And that's where, it comes in. But again, I can make a case that they should keep him around and try and, build some things up. One of the things is if they don't win a playoff game this year, okay? If they don't win a playoff game this year, at the very least, the Steelers should step in and say, okay, we're going to make you have to make some wholesale changes on your coaching staff. I think that's really an important thing. Like, you have to go out and freshen up your coaching staff, because they have the same guys and the same philosophy, and it's just stale. Something needs to change a little bit, maybe a lot. Nevertheless, I think that's really the most important thing is you've got a situation here where Mike Tomlin has been here a long, long time, and what they're doing just shouldn't be good enough. And the other part of it is, I think that if you're not going to move on from him, you have to at least make moves around him so he knows that he's not comfortable. If they don't. Now, look, again, they got 4 games left. Maybe they can, win enough games that they win the division and, jump over Jacksonville or whatever and get to like the 3 seed, and then they have a good first home game against somebody that they can beat, and they win and make a run. Okay, but that's different. That's different. The question right now in front of everybody has been about Mike Tomlin because, he made the comment the other day, well, we are going to basically, I've always been on the hot seat. I've always had pressure. No, you really haven't. No, you really haven't. That's the biggest thing to me. You haven't had pressure, and because you haven't had pressure, it's a completely different situation. So it is going to be really important in my mind to, for the Steelers to watch what happens now, and whatever happens now, okay, in the next 4 games, I don't know. That should determine the future of what happens with Mike Tomlin. If they win and at the end of it, he wins a playoff game, he can stand up and crow, all that good stuff. Okay, that's good. That makes sense. But I just don't know. I really just don't know. I have to see how this season plays out before I really start, going into detail as to what I think needs to happen when it comes to Mike Tomlin and whether or not they should continue to move forward with him. We will talk again. Remember, it's a Monday night football game. You'll hear from me tomorrow, but then after that, you won't hear from me till after the Monday night football game I'll be on with Adam. We'll talk all about what happens and what is going on and everything that goes on and goes into the Steelers game. But we'll do that next week. Again, you'll hear from me tomorrow, but and then the next time will be after the game. Until then, enjoy your night.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.